everyone, and welcome. My name is Ivy Thade. I'm the Director of Education at the Costume Designers Guild, Local 892 in Los Angeles, California. Today, we're going to be discussing gender diversity in Hollywood. Our moderator today is Scott Turner Schofield, and we have an amazing panel. Welcome, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming today. I'm really happy to have you all here. I am a transgender man. I also identify as non-binary, and I'm an actor, I'm a writer. I'm working a lot in production as a consultant, which is also a producer gig, depending on who you ask. And I work specifically on Euphoria. That's my sort of main gig, but I've worked in film and television now for going on 6 years at this point. As someone who is transgender and who started my transition 20 years ago, which is quite a long time to be dealing with people dealing with me, I've learned a lot about how we can sort of bridge this gap in understanding between one another. And then as an actor, I knew that if I wanted to be the actor that I wanted to be, have the career that I wanted to have, that I would really have to help make the world that I wanted to be a part of. And so that's how I got into consulting. And so what we're going to do is we just always have to start with a Trans 101. We're going to start with that just to get everybody kind of on the same page. Please, have your questions ready, write them down, and we're going to have a Q&A toward the end of this. But in between, we're going to be working with some really fantastic voices, really fantastic people who have so much experience with this, who are just really going to go on a deep dive into what you as costume designers are really concerned with, just to get us on with the most basic topics that we possibly could have. So we start with where we are now-ish. The Harris poll did a really great survey that gives us a lot of information about where we are as both an audience, right, and as a culture. We know that 87% of Americans personally know someone who is lesbian, gay, or bisexual, which is, the categories that Harris poll used. I would also add queer, right, and other words to do with sexuality. I joke that the other 13% are lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, right? But only 20% of Americans personally know someone who is trans. And again, I would add the word non-binary to this, right? So only 20% of Americans actually personally know someone, right? And so we know when we watch lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer characters on television, we can tell what's a stereotype, right? And we can tell what's pushing back against a stereotype. But when you don't, that's because we personally know someone, right? But when you don't know someone, you don't have a sense of their stories. And as I'm going to get into, Hollywood has done a really terrible job until very recently of telling trans and non-binary stories. You don't know what's real and what's not. So let's get into sort of some real foundation pieces. This is the first question that people really come to, like, okay, what is the difference, right? So again, these are kind of older words. This is a bit of an older slide, which just tells you that we're in an evolution, right? But it gives you kind of the most simplistic phrases that we have. We're currently working with an acronym LGBTQIA+, right? Which I'll get into. But for right now, words lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, right? Those are about your sexual orientation, who you love or who you want to go to bed with. Right? Transgender is about your gender identity, which is who you are or who you want to go to bed as, right? Now, why are all of these, if they're two separate things, why would they be in the same acronym? I want to say that it's because of gender, actually. Okay, so we live in a heterosexist society, right? And a heterosexist society says that if you are a man, then you are supposed to love women. And if you are a woman, then you are supposed to love men. And so if you are a man who loves men, you're not doing your gender right, according to a heterosexist society, right? If you're a woman who loves women, if you're somebody who loves both or more, right? You're not doing it right according to what the expectations of your gender are. And if you're trans or non-binary, that is to say, like myself, you're assigned female at birth and you become somebody who understands gender is far more fluid and expansive than just man or woman, right? But you move through the world as a man, as I do, right? You're definitely not doing your gender right, okay? All right, and we'll call that cis sexism. And I'm going to get to this I'm going to define all of these terms for you very shortly. But so basically, people who love or exist differently from the very narrow binary, right? We only have two choices, straight or gay, right? We have man or woman, right? If people who exist outside of that are not doing their gender right. And so that's why we're all kind of in the same group together, because we're oppressed by the same force. So speaking of oppression, I want to talk to you about this idea of intersectionality, okay? Intersectionality is not a new word, but it's kind of bubbling up. It may be new to you, right? Intersectionality are where the different parts of our identities meet. And so we're really focusing in this conversation really just on gender, right? But we all have a sex, we all have a gender, we all have a sexual orientation. We also all experience all these other things on the other list here on this slide, right? We all have a race or ethnicity, whether that's perceived, right, or what we're born into. Nationality, citizenship, ability, whether we have an invisible disability or a visible disability or no disability, right? Our age, the beauty standards, the geographic location, right? We have that term metrosexual that was so popular, but we don't have one that's like country sexual, right? Because we have this real delineation between the coasts and the middle, right? Especially here in this country. And that really means something about where you come from, the moment in time, what your generation is, right? And all of these things put you on kind of a spectrum where you can experience privilege, right? And here I'm going to define privilege as moving through the world easily without having to explain yourself and without being excluded because of some part of who you are, or oppression, right? As having to constantly explain yourself or being excluded because of some part of who you are, right? And when we recognize that everyone has struggles, it can show us why it's so important that we learn to be more sensitive to one another, right? So this idea of intersectionality where parts of your identities cross each other, right? Our intersections determine what feels really important to us, right? So if you have privilege in one area, right? For example, being heterosexual, right? And never having to explain yourself or face discrimination because of who you love, the concept of sexuality itself might not feel very important to you, right? As it may be for someone who's been fired for being gay, for instance, right? Gender is really deeply impacted. How we experience our own gender and how we express it out in the world is deeply impacted by our culture and by other intersections, right? And in representation, TV and film, what I love about this is this is where the metal really, the rubber really hits the road, right? Our intersections help tell our story, right? They are where those intersections meet are really important details about the character that are going to underline all the choices that they make and why, that make them super rich and interesting. Okay, so this is the world that we live in. And I even do this, okay? When someone in my world tells me that they're having a baby and we're having a little girl, I immediately flash to what a beautiful cisgender woman she will become and how gorgeous she will look on her white wedding day to a man. Okay. We assume that the sex you are assigned at birth is what you are going to grow up to become and that you're probably going to be straight, right? And look, this is the truth for a lot of people. That's fine. No one's trying to dissuade you of that or even really break that down. What we're saying is we just want more room for more people, right? Who, again, like myself, assigned female at birth, became a non-binary person that people experience as a man, right? Who identifies as queer, right? That there's got to be room for many, many, many more experiences of this. That's really what we're trying to say here. And to really understand that we have to pull apart these ideas, right? That they don't actually, it's not just like one straight line, right, through your life. That actually, I'm using this kind of motif here of the swirls, right? The human body is 70% water. Everything is a lot more fluid than we understand it, right? That sex, gender, and sexuality are separate concepts as well, right? That you can go in many directions. You have many intersections based on these concepts, right? In representation, how fluid or rigid a character's identities are, even starting here, right? will determine so much about how they operate and what artistic choices you can make and the actor can make. So I've used some words in context for you. So let's like break these down. Okay. So cisgender is a term that we weren't even using probably 8 years ago at this point. It's still a relatively new word in our lexicon. Cis is a Latinate prefix. It means on the same side as. So if you were assigned male at birth, you were a little boy, felt totally comfortable with that. You became a man, you feel great about that. You stayed on the same side, right? Whereas myself, right? Trans, there's a journey, but non-binary. Binary means there's two choices. Non-binary means seeing a lot more choices than just that, right? Cisgender, I love as a term because it gives most of the world a non-judgmental, scientifically accurate way to describe their gender, right? You're not normal, right? Normal is a really judgmental word. So here's a word, here's a word that you can have that describes how you've moved through the world. And I have my words, right? Our community has our words, and that can be, and so now we can all talk to each other without in any way being judgmental of one another, which I think is really helpful in this conversation. Finally, the word intersex. Okay, so you may have heard the word hermaphrodite. Okay, we're just going to take that word and we're just going to throw it on the slag pile of history, right? This is a word for people who, and let's just say that there are 17 different ways that science knows so far that a person can be born neither typically male nor female. It is a mosaic. It's a mix, right, of your chromosomes, your hormones, and your physical characteristics. Okay. In representation, we've often seen or heard of this idea of like being born with both sets of genitals, which it's so much more subtle and complicated than that. Intersex is not the same as being transgender because intersex has to do with your sex, your biology, your physical characteristics, whereas transgender is about identity, right? And your understanding of yourself. But what I love about intersex is, again, this swirly motif. It is nature. It is nature showing us the mirror, that there are so many more than just two choices, that we really have to get off this trip, right? Of believing that it's black or white, right? That it's either or, right? That there's just so much more richness and diversity in the world, that in fact, diversity is the only constant. Okay, so there are at least 72 different words that a person could use to describe their gender, at least. And we're constantly in evolution. We're constantly finding more authentic ways to describe ourselves. And authenticity is really the key, right? It doesn't matter how a person describes their gender to you. When a person is describing their gender to you, it means that they are going through a process of experiencing their own authenticity, right? And that they're sharing that with you. And understanding our truths, right? Understanding our authenticity is so important to human beings in general, right? So no matter what a person says, don't worry if you don't understand it. You can probably Google it, right? If you know this person well, if it's an appropriate time and place, it's a wonderful, deep, rich conversation to have, right? Not, again, right? If it's the appropriate time and place to have that conversation, right? But more than anything, these are so many words that give us so many stories that we can represent, right? Okay, so let's think about this. I want to talk about, again, we're just 101 going through some concepts of words that we should use, right? So transgender woman, you can also say trans woman, a woman of trans experience, right? Someone for whom their transition, right, is something that happened in the past and they are living their lives as the woman that they know themselves to be. Or you can just say woman, because transgender women are women, okay? You can see here too that as with all femininity, right, there is a pretty narrow standard of beauty that we see in representation, and these are all famous trans women and women of trans experience, right? But you still can see diversity in how people express their femininity, which is important to hold space for. transgender men, right? One other thing I should say, when we're talking about transgender women, when we're talking about people in general, we're talking about the way that they go, right? So someone who was assigned male at birth who has become a woman is a transgender woman. And here for transgender men, someone who was assigned female at birth, right, becoming male, right, is a transgender man, a trans man, man of trans experience, or just a man, right? Every individual has their own preference for how they prefer to describe themselves, what feels most authentic to them, right? And so these are just some words that, again, at a very 101 level, you are maybe going to hear. Then we've got non-binary, gender non-conforming. You may also have heard words like gender queer, right? And what's important here is look at the diversity that's going on here. So at the top here, I have people who are assigned male at birth, who identify as non-binary or gender non-conforming. And at the bottom, I have folks who are assigned female at birth, right? We have to think about how this again is one of those wonderful, juicy, rich, and complex places, right? Many non-binary people also identify as part of the trans community, but some don't, right? And there's a real spectrum of how people express a non-binary identity, right? From so gender non-conforming that you really can't miss it, right? To not being able to see any difference between them and cis people, right? So over here I have Nico Tortorella on the top left of this slide, and on the bottom, Amanda Stenberg on the bottom right. These are folks who both use they, them pronouns, right? Who actively identify as non-binary, but who in representation, we look at them and we don't see that, right? There's no right way to be trans or non-binary, right? And what's more, all of the ways that you do it mean a new and interesting story that there is to tell. So some situational awareness about where we are as a community and where we are in representation. So we've got, if you look at the documentary Disclosure, Trans Lives on Screen, which is mandatory viewing at this point, right? Looking at Disclosure, it takes you through the history of Hollywood and, over 50 years of representation in television and film that paints transgender people as psychopathic killers, tragic suicides. They're always transgender women, almost never men, right? And very important, this is not my mistake, they're almost all white, okay? Now, what happens when they're all psychopathic killers, right? A guy thinking he's a woman is seriously scary, right? That is the message that sends to people. But also, even in these very sympathetic portraits of transgender people that were played by, of transgender women that were played by cisgender men, right? All of these folks, by the way, earned their Oscars off of these roles, right? In the same way that playing somebody with a profound disability is a way that someone gets an Oscar. Well, we don't have very many actors who have profound disabilities in Hollywood, right? It's what they did when they showed up to win their Oscars was they showed up in their tuxedos with their beards and their girlfriends, right? And what that, again, unconsciously said to the audience was transgender women aren't real. They are just cisgender men who are pretending, who are playing dress up, right? And this has caused profound danger and harm to transgender women. First of all, right? Not existing as a real person, that really does a number on you mentally, right? Secondly, to have nobody be able to believe you, no one willing to believe you or to even see who you are and the complexity and the depth of your identity, right? But lastly, when we give people the idea that transgender women are quote unquote really just men, right? What that does is it sets up a dangerous situation for trans women where if a cisgender heterosexual man finds himself attracted to her, then thinks, oh my God, I'm attracted to quote unquote a man, right? They often and very often have a violent response to that, a violent homophobic response to that, okay? And so what that does is it's and unfortunately, we'll get to this, I'll explain what it does, right? I'm just going to jump forward to say, here's what it does, right? It gets people killed. Okay. There's actually a legal defense called gay panic, where if a heterosexual cisgender man freaks out and kills a transgender woman because of his intense, right, fear of himself as that he might be gay because he thinks that this person is that this transgender woman is a gay man, right? It's called gay panic, and he can get away with it. Okay. So it's very serious. I'm going to go back to this part just to show you where we still are in terms of our equality, right? Our legal equality. In 2020, the Supreme Court said that it is illegal to fire someone because they are transgender in 2020. Okay. And it's still very difficult to determine why somebody gets fired. So this happens all the time. Legal equality is defined by how difficult it is to get or keep a job, whether or not you can change your name, right? So whether or not you are protected from harassment in schools, whether or not you can use the bathroom, right, in public spaces. So we see an awful lot of red there, and it's still, this is a very difficult reality for people to wake up into. And here are some really intense facts about the trans experience, right? 4 times the rate of unemployment as the general population. 1 in 5 have been discriminated against in seeking a home. 1 in 10 have been evicted, right? 40% of respondents report attempting suicide. So that's people who report it, right? Versus all the people who don't. And attempting, meaning someone who has actually done something about it. Okay. So the real effects of inequality, again, right, are serious and intense. So how do we undo this? Well, we have to understand that trans and non-binary people have existed across all time in every culture, right? We have, there's a wonderful documentary series a web series that Rhys Ernst, one of our panelists, has created called We've Been Around, which goes into the history of many trans folks and really gives you a sense of who we are and just how long we've been around. And also just recognizing that we are everywhere. I took a lot of trouble to find this person right in the center here who's working at Starbucks, because back in the mid-90s, Starbucks started offering trans-inclusive health insurance, which meant that a lot of trans people started working there, even just part-time. And so that means if you've ever had a cup of coffee at Starbucks, it's likely that you've met a trans person, whether you knew it or not, right? Basic allyship. Here's this comic here where we're seeing someone misgendering someone by saying ladies, 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 and you see this character sort of melting, right? It's very hard to describe how it feels, or all of the things that it brings up when you misgender a person by using the wrong pronoun for them. But suffice it to say that I believe that you wouldn't do it, right? I believe that most people are good enough that you wouldn't do it if you knew how it made people feel. So using the correct pronoun is one of the first and most obvious places where we need to really do that. And so what do you do if you don't know what the right pronoun to use is? Well, this is a phrase that, again, as we're evolving in our language, right, we're finding new ways to talk to one another and to find out about each other's authenticity, right? So this is actually a polite sentence to use. People get very afraid of how awkward this might be, but it's not as awkward as you think, right? So here we are. What pronoun should I use for you? And in fact, if you want to be even more inclusive, you can say, hey, my name's Scott and I use he and they pronouns. What pronoun should I use for you, right? Including yourself in the conversation about gender, right? They, them, their pronouns. Okay, this is actually something that's relatively new. We've been doing this for just over 5 years, right? We've been doing this very consciously. And I say that, I make that marker because in 2015, that's when all of the dictionaries agreed that it is actually grammatically correct to use they or them or their to refer to one person. Actually, we do this all the time, right? When IT says, we'll send somebody over on Tuesday, you say, great, when will they arrive? Because you're not sexist, right? You don't assume that your IT person is going to be a guy. You don't say, when will he arrive, right? You say they when you don't know. Right? Now, these folks know, right? They know that they're not he or she, right? And there are many actually other words that we could use that are gender neutral, right? That don't use it, but that don't sort of fit with he or she. But they, them, there is the most basic English that we have, right? And I actually think that this is a step. I think as soon as we can get on board with using they, them, their for folks who identify with that pronoun, we will then find one that really actually fits for everybody and for more people. Okay, if you mess up, okay, I put this comic on the side here because as a dog owner, I experience this all the time. I have a very floofy Pomeranian, and everybody thinks, I guess, because he's floofy that he's a she. I don't understand, but okay, I'd never understand people's concepts of gender. What can I do? People get so freaked out when they misgender my dog, right? Now, I don't want you to be freaked out when you misgender a person, right? I maybe want you to worry less about the gender of a dog and more about the gender of a person, right? But if you do mess it up, it's really simple, right? I'll give you an example. If someone were to say to me, or to a group of people, Scott would like the papers on her desk, but oh my God, Scott, I'm so sorry. This gender thing, it's just so difficult. I'm really trying, right? That's just sort of adding insult to injury, right? So how about Scott said she'd like I'm sorry, Scott. Scott said he'd like the papers on his desk by the end of the day. It was if it was a slip of the tongue, no big deal. You just move forward, right? Now, here's the thing. You do actually really have to learn this very quickly. You have to learn it in the single instances for the single people in your workplace or your world who uses he or they pronouns or she or they pronouns, right? That might be different from what you first learned. You have to learn that very quickly within about 2 weeks, especially when you're in a workplace, because it very quickly becomes workplace harassment if you don't, right? And again, I choose to believe that you wouldn't misgender someone and make them feel as bad as it does when you do that. So make a flashcard, change it in your cell phone, right? Practice it in your mind. Practice makes perfect. And that's really all we have to worry about. Gendered language is very important to start undoing, right? Because we have so many people now who are not identifying with the binary that saying things like men or women, when you could say everyone, right, is a very simple, easy, switch. Guys, people will push back on this. People push back against this all the time and say, no, guys is definitely gender neutral. It's definitely not gender neutral. And it really does refer to a group of men. I can tell you this because whenever I put this up, I have female executives and people who work in offices coming up to me always saying, thank you so much for saying that. People say guys all the time. I'm a woman. I don't identify as a guy and I don't want to be called one. So we really do have to change this in our language, right? Folks is really simple. Y'all, I'm a Southerner. I love y'all. It means all, right? We've already talked about theirs as opposed to his or her. And this one made me think of costume designers because you're constantly thinking about what people are wearing. Simply describe the person in the red shirt, right? As opposed to the lady or man, right? Simple shifts, right? It seems so simple that it's almost too easy, right? But as soon as we all get to this place, right, then we can take the next steps. And I'm really excited about what are the next steps, because I think that they have a lot to do with equity and justice. Here's my information. Like I said, that was the simplest 101 we could possibly do, right? But there's much more to it and a lot more to say. So that's where you can find me if you want to talk more about it. Now, I'm very happy to introduce the panel that we have to talk about this, now that we're sort of all on the same page. So if my panel could turn on your video, I want to introduce, here we go. We have Dr. Shakina Nayfack. She is a performer, director, writer, producer, and activist living in New York City, most known for her work as Lola on the Hulu comedy series Difficult People. She starred and helped to write and produce the Transparent Musical.ly finale, and recently became the first out transgender actress series regular on a primetime network comedy on NBC's Connecting. So welcome, Shakina. Thanks for being here. Rhys Ernst is a filmmaker and artist. His debut feature film, Adam, premiered at the Sundance 2019 Film Festival. He was a producer and actor on Amazon's Transparent and was nominated for a 2015 Emmy Award for directing and producing the web series This Is Me. He also created the online series, which I mentioned, We've Been Around, which showcases figures in transgender history. Trayce Gigi Field. Costume designer Trayce Gigi Field's striking design style has catapulted her to the top of her field in the world of film and television. She's known for her vibrant tastes in color and her quirky yet fun choices in style and texture. Her multicultural background helps her see the world through a broad perspective. Living a life through diverse eyes, Trayce is able to create visual characters of all types. Marie Schley, Emmy Award-winning costume designer for Transparent, whose culturally impactful costumes have been added to the Smithsonian National Museum permanent collection. Marie has also worked as a fashion designer and stylist. Heidi Bivens, costume designer for Euphoria, has worked extensively as a stylist in the fashion industry and contributing fashion editor to Vogue US, and is a founding committee member of the organization The Film Path, which we're going to talk a little bit more about soon here. And Christopher Hargadon, designer for The Umbrella Academy, Hannibal, The Kennedys, and The X-Files, was a fashion designer in France and in North America for a decade before joining the ranks of the film and television business. So welcome to all of you. I'm so excited to have your expertise and your experience and your perspective on this conversation. Shakina, you're kind of I was thinking of the tip of the spear, but the tip of the needle, I guess we could say here, as an actress who has earned major roles on multiple series, who's also a transgender woman. I want to center your experience here right at the top, because I think it gives us a framework for the rest of the conversation. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience with costume designers in your career so far?
Yeah, sure. I also just want to say, excuse me, that was such a great 101. So everyone who's on this call, you're so lucky to have gotten Scott's 101. It was really so wonderful. So hi, everybody. I'm Shakina. I use she, her pronouns. I identify, excuse me, as a gender non-conforming trans woman. Yeah, I have been very fortunate, as Scott said, to be able to get some gigs in the industry, which is really hard and really rewarding. And, you know, when I was talking to Scott about this panel before we all got on together, I was thinking about the ways that for me, fashion and presentation have been like such an important part of my identity in my self-discovery and in my transition. And how I'm like a novice, you know, and y'all are experts in this field of creating character through style and fashion. And something that's been so empowering for me in my journey of not only, you know, stepping into my fullness as a trans woman, but also stepping into my career as an actor, has been working with designers who've helped me understand how my body can work to affirm my gender through fashion and styling and wardrobe. And I've actually learned so many tips and tricks about how to dress. I've taken greater risk because of costume designers who saw things that would fit my body in ways that I never dared to imagine, or I was too intimidated to try on my own. So I thought it was really interesting to think about how, as a costume designer, you know, when you're working with trans talent, you're not only doing the regular job of like helping to create a role and putting your artistic touch onto the character that this actor is going to be portraying, but you're also potentially playing a part in this trans person's liberation, and that's so huge. Like I have cried in costume fittings, not out of like body shame, but out of like, I never thought I could be this pretty. I never thought I could wear this thing. I never thought my body would look the way that you're showing me it can look. And that's actually like a huge, huge gift.
Absolutely. You know, it's so hard from my own personal experience too, just how much clothing itself, right? When we were young little trans kids, right? That the fight with our families could be so intense around what we were wearing. And so when we show up into on set into a room like this, we bring all of that. And I love how you thought about that as like, yeah, this can actually be a totally freeing experience. And it really, no pressure, costume designers, but you actually really do, you really can help us move through something that is so intense in our lives.
Yeah, the inverse can also be true, I'll say, is that I've had, I've had experiences working on sets where I'm like a co-star or a guest star, and I've had experiences where I'm a recurring or a series regular. And I think I know that the sort of like rush to get people ready can sometimes lead to like flippant language and a high-paced, fitting process. And in some, fittings experiences, I felt like it was really clear from the jump that this designer didn't know how to fit or dress my body. I'm not only a trans woman, but I'm like a trans woman of size. I'm like, plus size and 6'2". And there were times when I felt like I was literally just getting like a wool curtain thrown over me, rather than like helping me build a character and use my body to assert the identity of that character. So, in those instances where I feel like it's like, oh, just get by the thing that's uncomfortable and just like move them through without having to worry too much or think too much. It is like, it's not just disheartening as an actor working a job that you want to bring your most to, but it's also sort of like, terrifying as a trans person to sort of feel like you're like maybe being disguised or hidden away or exploited for your transness, which could also happen. So, the potential for you to be like an assistant in the liberation of this person is also like counterpart to the potential for you to be like unconsciously, re-traumatizing someone who's had to battle so hard to get to where they are, to be who they are and dress the way they want to dress.
And I think the difference is so much about intentionality, which we're going to see here in our conversation. Rhys, I want to pivot to you as, when in your work as a producer for Transparent, you, along with Zachary Drucker, created one of the first like real protocols, right, for creating and maintaining trans sensitivity on set, which then you went and used in your major motion picture, Adam. Can you sort of talk us through the process that you created at that level of production to help the trans and non-binary actors and crew also do their best work?
Yeah, so it's funny because it feels like a long time ago now, but we started doing this in, I guess, 2014, I want to say. And Joey Soloway, brought myself and Zachary Drucker on to work on the pilot of Transparent, and then we moved on to season 1 and the rest of the seasons from there. But we started really kind of similarly to how you kicked this off, Scott, in a lot of ways by creating a Trans 101. Zachary and I created a document that we amended every year as definitions kind of continued to evolve. And that document would go out with everyone's start paperwork, but also we would sort of make the rounds and sometimes do a big presentation like this for a bigger group, and sometimes do it more specifically to various departments. So we'd have a conversation with the wardrobe department that might be a little bit different from the conversation we'd have with the AD department. And actually, Marie, of course, is my old colleague. So, we could feel free to jump in, Marie, with any anecdotes, because we worked together a lot on this over the years. But, I think part of it was to create a culture of get everyone on the same page and create a culture of openness so people could ask questions and they could ask us questions. We made ourselves available to that. And we wanted to acknowledge that everybody was kind of coming to the conversation from different points. And we'd have Teamster dudes and we would have non-binary extras. And, it was all really kind of a big fluid mix of people. And we wanted to make that work and sort of let it be a work in progress. So some of the things that came up are some of the things that you have talked about too, Scott. For example, pronouns is obviously a big one. And I think that comes up in wardrobe issues a lot, particularly with extras and, the non-principals. And if you're having people coming and going, if you don't know who they are, you don't know their backgrounds, how do you refer to them quickly in the moment and not make it a big deal? And we would just talk about that generally and how you can refer to someone before you know what their pronoun is. And, it's kind of like, I've been thinking about this recently too, how reporters refer to their sources or something like that. It's like the people use a gender neutral or, a they pronoun all the time without realizing that they're doing this. My cousin's coming in at 3. Oh, what time which airport are they flying into? So just getting kind of used to that. And, perhaps when people are having fittings or bringing people in, maybe it's part of your clipboard where you're writing down people's pronouns next to their names. Also, I wanted to, bring up legal names versus given names or chosen names, which is something that comes up often. So that I think we would have, make sure that when people are being intake, on their intake or whatever, wherever they're coming from, that was denoted. And just kind of getting used to that process and creating systems around that. I think one thing that was really useful that we did for many seasons was a "Hello, my name is" name tag for everybody. In the morning, every morning on set or whatever stage we're in, everybody would have a name tag as they were coming in and write their name and pronouns on it, which is just a really easy way. Also because, crews are large and you might not know everybody's name. It's just kind of a helpful protocol as well. And then, we implemented all gender bathrooms and changing tents. So we would have 3 changing tents actually, which is, I think at the time that was probably pretty novel, and I'm not sure if that was happening on other sets, and maybe that's happening more these days, I hope. And
that we found with Euphoria similarly was also it's about privacy and not privacy, right? So there are folks who, have been dancers their whole lives and will just take off their clothes in front of anybody, they don't really care. But then also having a space where someone, regardless of what their gender identity might be, who really needs privacy. Because when you really do need privacy, you really need it, right? So I think to add to that, yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm just looking at a list of some notes here I had. I also, this actually came up a little bit earlier, but just even the idea of having different sizing options for trans actors is a really important thing to start to think through. And that can look like a lot of different things based on the circumstances. And then also just working with the costume department, and we did this a lot too, on doing research and making sure, things were authentic and, reference images for looks and stuff like that those were authentic for whatever they happen to be, whether they're contemporary or period, and really kind of drilling down and getting really specific with that. And, I wanted to share another anecdote, but I don't know if I should say any more about the transparent stuff while we're on it. Because Marie, it's cool that you're here if you wanted to jump in on any of that.
I was just going to add that one of the other things that was implemented on maybe sort of the end of transparent was that pronouns were put on the call sheet. So it's like your the actor's number and their pronouns, so that was available as a reference. And then also, you guys were also really, we learned very quickly on transparent about the importance of casting, and especially for background casting, and working to find the right people to play all the different types of worlds we were going into, and not just doing like a cattle call. And I think you guys really worked incredibly well with Central, if I remember correctly, getting people, to be in their system with sizing and all that kind of stuff.
Well, Maria, and I think it even sometimes happened that we would, talk about deferring to some extent to a background actor if they were like, oh, I don't feel comfortable in this outfit, I wouldn't want to wear that, and kind of like incorporating their feedback to a certain extent, obviously, and making sure people were comfortable, they weren't being kind of squeezed into the wrong presentation that didn't feel right for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's jump right into it, Marie. So you worked on Transparent, and, from the beginning, which was before we really knew sort of what a cultural force that show would become, right? Which, isn't to say that obviously trans issues were, in our conversations and in our lives, right? We were having those conversations, but that show really sort of catalyzed an unprecedented visibility for trans stories. While at the same time, as Rhys is pointing out, doing a lot of really intentional work to create a culture on set that could be an example for shows in the future, which is really laudable. So Marie, can you sort of talk about being inside of that early transition, right? And the things that you learned along the way that might be helpful to folks who are encountering this topic for the first time in their work?
I mean, it is amazing to think back on how different things were back then. I mean, we did the pilot actually in 2013, Rhys. And we were working at Paramount at that time, and I couldn't even Google anything trans related because it was considered pornography. So the studio had blocked it. So that was a really jarring moment to come up against a literal wall. And just, I mean, for me, for sure, I'm a cisgender woman who uses her and she pronouns. And there were a lot, my questions have, evolved over the years, for sure. I mean, at the beginning, it was like, it was incredible to have Rhys and Zachary there because first of all, amazing artists and really could contribute so much to the project. But there's a lot of questions that are uncomfortable to ask, that are like taboo. There are, I'm just basic questions about like presentation, and even now I'm like, can I say this on this, but on this panel? But one of the examples was, I always talk about is like we had cast Melora Hardin as the love interest for Amy Lendecker's character. And we kept going through a lot of different ideas about what this character would look like. She's in Los Angeles. She's a architectural designer. What would that be? And a lot of the research pictures that I was being shown, they weren't matching up to what the character was. And eventually I realized it's because it wasn't about really necessarily so much about the clothes. It was about the way the clothes were on the body. And so a lot of people in the reference pictures had top surgery or were, wearing binders, and then putting that onto the actor completely changed the way the clothes were and the way that they were looking to the world. So
you don't know what's a binder.
Yeah. And I didn't know what it was either. And I think there is that lag where people assume that what's happening and what's going on and what's creating that. And I figured it out. And now I have a binder always in my kits. I use them all the time for all sorts of different things to create different looks. And it was a real eye-opener because it was like, translating what I'm seeing into like, how do I get to that place?
So binder is a piece of material. Sometimes it's an ace bandage. Sometimes it's a larger sort of elasticated, piece of fabric that flattens the chest. Right. And so, right. And I love that exactly your characterization of it's about how the clothes look on the body, which is your primary concern. Right. And finding this, but yeah, who would think to say the word binder to you? Who would think, right? Because it's something that we don't really talk about, or we talk about sort of intra-community, right? And then sharing that information. And I love that it's like now something that you use all the time, right? That's such a great story about how we're moving out into culture in general. So to go from that sort of like early transition point to now, right? We just recently in the last few months had a situation where kind of a major star, Elliot Page, right, transitioned in their personal life, which happens to coincide on the series Umbrella Academy, which Christopher, you're the costume designer for. So we're sort of waiting to find out, right? And I know that there's a lot that you can't say, Christopher, about how or if that will change the character at all. But I just keep thinking like, this is so going to happen again, right? Because as more folks come out, right, as more folks learn and figure out their identities and make the big choice to and the big leap to live their lives without thinking about, am I going to get fired? Is this going to end my career, right? As we see more trans and non-binary people becoming visible at the level of, mainstream mass media, that's, it's going to embolden folks who haven't felt like they could disclose their transgender identity for fear of ending their careers, right? It's always important to say, for instance, I'm the first out, trans man to be nominated for an Emmy for acting, and Shakina is the first out trans woman to be a series regular. We're out. That doesn't mean that, that means people know about it. It doesn't mean that there weren't trans people doing this before. Right. So, Christopher, in the midst of this transition, can you share whatever you're able to about sort of your observations about how this has happened? Because I think it's going to happen again for folks, and I want them to be sort of prepared for that.
One thing I want to say about this show before I start speaking about Elliot is I've really appreciated it from the beginning because it really portrays a diverse range of people and sort of a spectrum of perspectives. I'll give you an example. My home is in Hawaii. My next door neighbor asked me about a year and a half ago if I could send something like an autograph or something, which I didn't feel comfortable with, but I sent a sketch to this 14-year-old girl in another state who was a trans female. And at that age, I can imagine how difficult it was for her, but was a great fan of the show. And the kids in the neighborhood watched the show as a group. And ultimately, her acceptance in her peer group was elevated by the fact that we had all these interesting characters that everybody was starting to see really for the first time in their experience. So already, I think that's why Elliot was attracted to the show initially. It's as an actor, he's very open, approachable, was very specific at the beginning about the type of character he wanted to play. At the beginning, it was an androgynous person. And I actually had to research it a fair bit because I hadn't actually ever had an androgynous character in my career experience before. So that was a real learning curve for me personally, as well as for the producers and everyone else who was involved. So we did our best. So there was already an element of this character that was non-specific. This year, which is the third season, when we met for our first fitting, we'd obviously spoken on the phone, and I knew what was happening in Elliot's life. And it was before anything was divulged to the media. When we finally got together, I just noticed an incredible shift in his energy. He just seemed so much happier, so much more light, really, really positive. And I've always applauded him for his trailblazing ferocity. Really, this very diminutive person in a tiny body really is like a lion out in the world, sort of waving the banner and brandishing the whole progression in society. But at the same time, this brings a ferocious backlash. And at the time that we met, we've met a few times since, obviously we're shooting now, but there's also the bullying media, the online nastiness, which nobody could really be immune to. And I think that was really weighing and impacting him quite a bit. So I feel really that our job within the film business in general, I think already we're a group of kind of nomadic gypsy types. We don't live with the regular kinds of securities a lot of people have in general society. We're therefore quite adaptable to different, situations. Sometimes things fly in our face just randomly like that, and we have to, react appropriately and make things work. So I just feel like as a group, we're really equipped with the tools to support this movement of, diversity and understanding and opening up and really waving the flag to the world as to how things can progress and improve and shift moving forward. So as a costumer, I think my main responsibility for any actor is to make them feel secure and comfortable and happy within their skin when they put on a costume. As Shakina had mentioned, and thank you, Shakina, for all those lovely things that you said about costume people. But it's our job to make people be able to portray the character. And when I spoke with Elliot, the character he's playing currently is still a female, physically a female. And we'll see where the show goes with that character, because I have to say, The showrunner is one of the most open people I've ever met in my life, and he's certainly sensitive. So I think it'll be a very interesting season.
You know, it's funny because it brings up for me this phrase that I say sometimes flippantly, but I actually really believe, you know, it's that trans and non-binary people are like literal superheroes in our midst, because when you interact with us, when you really take us on, you allow us to shift your whole concept of gender, which when we think about it is such a huge thing that we keep in our heads that we sort of don't realize is as big as it actually is. So the idea that like individual people, right, a community of individuals can really shift the way that, you know, that you see things, that you work, right? That's, I think, what we call in the business changing the world, right? Which I'm very happy about. But I mean, we're having this conversation right now, right? Because of the growing visibility of trans identities in Hollywood. So I want to ask sort of to the group, you know, how has working with trans and non-binary storylines changed your perspective and your work in this way that Chris is talking about?
So, as you well know, I did designed AJ and the Queen, and I got to meet such a wide array of people, and every fitting was like an education. I got to learn so much about drag queens and non-binary and just like, you know, across the board. So, I mean, basically, I feel like for me, it was an education in like a community. It was an education in like really getting to know people. I would go into those fittings with, you know, my my way of thinking, just being like, okay, Psych 101, let me like talk to this person, get to know them, understand where they're coming from, make sure that they're comfortable in whatever we're doing. So, yeah, I mean, I just feel like when you, or for me, when I was exposed to people that I wouldn't necessarily like be exposed to, it really broadened my horizon of the way I thought. And I feel like it also helped me with like costume design, because it's like, you know, it helped me really understand people in a different way.
It was funny when we were talking about this earlier, I said, you know, drag queens know how to dress, right? Yeah. But you really kind of pushed back to me on that.
Well, this is the thing. It's like drag queens know how to dress for their particular drag, right? And then if it's a scripted character, it might be a different sort of drag. And I have to say, like, I hadn't had the experience of dressing, of designing for drag queens. And I feel like listening to them and also like coming from a different point of view of my own, you know, we really like created these characters together. I would show them reference and like, or thoughts that I was like thinking about, or I'd have fabric in the fitting, or I'd have like an illustration. And I kind of like, I feel like they taught me something, and I like helped expose them to things that they wouldn't necessarily have thought to put on their body, just like Shanika said. I think I said that name right. So it's like, you know, you kind of come to this moment together where you're like finding a character, and then they are like, wow, look at me. I never even thought that this would be my drag. And they're like super excited about it. And so then as a costume designer, you're like, wow, I feel great about like what's happening, you know?
I love that. I love that collaboration. Heidi, you and I talked about, so I give a workplace production workshop where I talk about sort of appropriate and inappropriate conversations that we can have on set, right? And one of the things that I talk about is how trans people have been taught that really like the only interesting thing about us is our gender or our transition. And so, you know, obviously for costume designers, you have to talk about someone's body. You have to talk with us about our bodies. And like and the thing is too, the more that I talk with costume designers, the more I know that you're eminently qualified to do this, right? You're very sensitive because you work with actors. So you know how sensitive we are, and you can be very sensitive to people. So I'm less worried about that piece, right? But the part about where trans folks will often bring up, you know, we'll talk about our own transition in ways that can sometimes be inappropriate, right? Because we're talking about something else entirely, right? And I thought it was so interesting, Heidi, because that really stuck with you. And I wondered if you could say more about why.
Yeah, I've brought it up several times in other conversations with people. It really resonated with me when you were talking about the idea that, you don't need to talk to a transgender person about their transitioning or, the fact that they're transgender, and that actually it can be quite refreshing if you don't, and you are, have other things to talk about, and that it doesn't always have to be about them being transgender. And I thought that was just really helpful and really smart thing to point out, because it's true. I mean, actually, Hunter Schafer and I on the show, I don't think we've ever talked about her transition, although it's starting to come up more now since she co-wrote the special episode that she starred in, which was the last episode that aired. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with her character on the show. When I first started working with her, it was scripted that Jules, the character, would be like heteronormative in a way. And I think very quickly we decided not to stick with that and to sort of move away from that. So as Hunter is discovering who she is as a person and wants to be as a person, I'm also learning and getting to go on this journey with her. And I think Sam Levinson, the showrunner, creator, writer as well. And it'll be really exciting to see, how Jules develops in the show. Yeah, through Hunter.
I think so too. I'm just like loving the way that it's such a collaboration like just sort of globally, a collaboration in that way. It's amazing. Let's get down to sort of brass tacks, but also like artistically, right? Because you're all artists and that's like what we're all here to do, right? So like sort of in practical, but also artistic terms, right? Like how can costume designers sort of effectively meet this transition that we're all in, that we're all collaborating on together, of depicting trans and non-binary lives on screen? What are some of the practices you use? What are things that you found to be successful? We've already talked, like with Marie's comment about the binder, right? Like that was a process of learning these really particular specifics and then seeing how they impact how you do your design and then using them in the rest of your design going forward. So jump in, sort of what's working for you? What are you finding right now?
Well, I'll just continue sort of like on the thought of you and I collaborating, Scott. When I first started working on Euphoria, the idea of even an intimacy coordinator was relatively new position, and there was like a couple other shows, Transparent, I'm sure, and there was a couple other shows who were using intimacy or trans coordinators, but this was a new position that my crew at the time was not used to collaborating with, and so like I think maybe all the designers on this panel could agree that before this position existed, we were the coordinators, we were the intimacy coordinator, we were the people who had those conversations. I can remember being in positions where like a director wanted someone to like take their top off, and like I was the one that had to like go have the conversation with them about it. So I'm very thankful that now this position exists and that I can focus on creative aspects of the job and and collaborate with the coordinator, Scott. I have the great pleasure of working with. So I think that's exciting, and this new position that now exists that can help designers in so many ways, and to be able to collaborate, I think is important.
I agree. We have a little story. We were working with a non-binary actor who was playing someone who wasn't quite clear if they were non-binary, but it was an intimacy scene, and there was all this business with writers and nudity writers. And the point was the actor wanted to use a binder. And the thing was, the protocol hadn't been exactly established yet. So Heidi and I hadn't really worked together. And we had this moment that's, all fine and good, but I think it's really emblematic of how we need to jump in and have these conversations and build rapport with one another. Because I was sitting there with this artist, Heidi had done a great job, had all the costumes lined out. And I see this artist having an emotional experience that I'm very familiar with, right? Which is this kind of moment of, oh my goodness, like everybody's going to see this on television. And it turned out it was their really first time, right? Experiencing wearing a binder, which is a profoundly intense experience for a human, right? And so I just kind of jumped in and like asked Heidi to like give us some space for a minute, which, because I wasn't as well versed in all of the work that you do, really kind of broke an opportunity for Heidi to create, a rapport with this actor and to be in that moment together. And it was because the roles are new together, right? My role, my whole purview is to take care of the trans actor. So that's what I sort of jumped in like a lion and did, right? And got to have this amazing experience with this young non-binary person, right? Seeing themselves for the first time and feeling themselves for the first time, which was beautiful, right? But yeah, I feel like if we had worked together for longer beforehand and had really kind of understood that collaboration, we could have been in that together.
Yeah, I didn't know what was going on. All I knew was I couldn't go in the trailer. It's a learning process, But I think especially on TV, things move so fast, and sometimes there's not always time built in to have these conversations, but that we have to build in the time, that production has to help us and they have to work with us to build in the time. And putting pronouns on call sheets is an amazing idea. Cami Lennox is on our Zoom panel, or she's on today, and she wrote that in the chat. And I agree. I think that that's something that could be implemented across the board. Yeah.
Marie, do you want to talk? You have a story too about building in the time, right?
Well, I just wanted to add, just to hop onto what you guys were saying about intimacy coordinating. It's like we had trans coordinators on Transparent. We didn't have intimacy coordinators. And it is one of those intersections with costumes that's really intense. And it's not just about the actors interfacing with each other. It's how they're seen through the lens of the camera. And it's really important to include the costume designer. This is why we ended up doing it all the time, because it's you shouldn't just assume that a cisgender man wants to bare his chest. He might not be comfortable with that either, and those are the kind of things you have to ask. But my story about finding the time was, it's not specifically a trans story related, but it's related to everything, where I was working on another show where there was definitely a conscious decision to make choices including genders in all different types of roles and background casting to be, it was a progressive way of looking at it. They were trying not to fall into the stereotypes. And we were doing a show about a casino, and casinos typically have a lot of rules around how their employees present themselves in terms of haircuts and, facial hair. And it's kind of police have that same thing. And they cast a lot of women background for the valets, and they don't make small or female-sized valet vests. And so there was a breakdown of communication between my supervisor and the ADs, because of course there was no time to make vests or find them. It was we got to change these people. And then it became I think that it eroded the communication where people weren't able to talk about the thing that this was really about, which was the fact that society doesn't create an easy fix for what we're trying to do. We're trying to push beyond these stereotypes, but the infrastructure is not necessarily there for us. And so, I mean, you can kind of, and while we were talking, Scott, you were like, well, then you need to ask production. You need to be really specific about what's happening with production. So they'll give you the time and money to accommodate that.
If you're making change, you need the support to make that change, right? It's not that you're resisting making it, it's just you're part of production. And if you don't have the time or the money, how are you going to do it, right?
From working with Marie on Transparent, that was really powerful, which is, you know, like as an actress, like I've always felt that my greatest currency is my ability to transform. And I'm really I'm the kind of actor who really wants to like look a bunch of different ways and play a bunch of different types of people. And, but then as a human, as myself, like as I said before, I'm a gender non-conforming trans woman. I sort of aspire to a level of feminine presentation on my day to day, but I'm also comfortable like rocking a shaved head and doing other things, sort of like playing in the fluidity of it all. But it's really important to me that like who I come in as the actor is different from who I'm playing and portraying, you know, on set. And in Transparent, not only was I playing a sort of non-binary character who's sort of like my age, but I also had to become like a 70-year-old trans woman and man. And so there were these days when, you know, we had several fittings for my costume for the Mort character. And it was really wild. Like, you know, I told Marie I want to wear a binder. And like, it was a hugely emotional experience to sort of step back in. Like, I felt like I was like trying on my like bar mitzvah suit, you know, and it was sort of like, it was really like fun and playful in the trailer. And that's because of the environment that Marie had created and the rapport that we had. But also when the day came to sort of step out on set in the suit and the, you know, the whole man drag getup, I suddenly felt like all of the weight of like all of the years that I had played boy just to get through life, you know? And so I remember so clearly, I just like feel like I want to share this story. I was like standing like just about to like walk onto set and see like everyone who was there that day. I had walked from, you know, my trailer to the door of the soundstage, and in this like suit, but my like, you know, my sort of like fluffy slippers. And then my dresser, Jimmy J, was there to help me put on the loafers. And as I like stepped into the loafers and just sort of like felt like everything that implied, he looked up to me and he was like, "You are an actress." And I just like burst into tears. And it was so incredible how like, because we're not trans people, thank God, are going to get opportunities to play roles where they're not just playing like typical quote unquote trans people. Like we're talent and we can do things across the board, but sometimes it takes a little more tenderness and awareness to understand like all the baggage that comes from our relationship to our bodies and to our gender presentation, and how that like manifests in the experience of like, you know, coming to set and coming to work and bringing your full self there. So I just wanted to share that story.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in on this?
I was just going to give Marie props also because from talking about the lack of intimacy coordinators, whenever the period before intimacy coordinators, because I directed the season finale of season 4 on Transparent, and one of my first scenes up was a threesome sex scene. And I could say from being the director on set that Marie really helped me with that process. And I learned so much actually from you, Marie, talking to you, and, you know, having a really great costume designer be in place to be an ally to the actors, knowing what their needs are, what their boundaries are, and how they like to work and what they're comfortable with. And it really helped me as a director going into the scene, because it's, you know, it's so fast, and we just started, you know, day one, first scene up, boom, go straight into it. And there wasn't really a lot of space created at that time. And I hope that the culture of that is shifting more. But I just think, costume designers have had that sort of burden, I guess, of intimacy coordination for a long time, but it's also, it's a testament to their allyship, I think, for the actors. And so I think that's really important. And I just wanted to, commend y'all.
Thank you. I'd like to make a comment if I could. It's a little bit unrelated to costuming in particular, but when Scott and I had a previous conversation, I was mentioning to him that one of my first, the first trans person that I knew in my life was when I was 10 years old, and this is going back 50 years. So at the time, she was a very good friend of mine, and we shared all of our secrets. And so I learned from a very early age this other person's inner life. And as a young child, I came from a progressive, open-minded kind of family in a liberal society, but I just, as a child, accepted everything about him, really, immediately without any questions. And the thing that I think is so awesome about the progress that we're making within our industry is that more and more young people will have access to these stories, this information, these realities. And, if you can have people from an early age actually understand all the diversity in the world, hopefully one day we won't even have to have these conversations. It will just be part of our society and our knowledge base.
100%. That takes us into our next section, but I just want to check. Tracy, do you have anything that you want to add to this? Just everybody's spoken, so I wanted to, we talked a little bit about like your sort of, your collaborative process with everybody. I don't know if there's something there for you.
For me, people are just people, right? And so like, I kind of just go into whatever fitting I'm going into, just kind of in an acceptance sort of like place, I do really enjoy, like I mentioned earlier, it's just about like the process for me is getting to like understand and know where people come from. And then being able to like marry that with making sure that they're really comfortable in what we're creating and what we're putting in front of the screen. I'm not interested in trying to put costumes on somebody that they don't feel comfortable in, because I don't want them to think about the clothes. I want them to be able to do their job, which is to act and perform. So for me, it's really just about like half of my job is like not only, creating the looks, but it's also like having this relationship with the actors and making sure that they're comfortable in what we're putting out there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's another way of not talking about it, right? Of getting to a place where we just don't even have to talk about it, right? That you can just
that's the thing for me. I just don't, I don't want to make anything like a big deal. We're there to do a job, and my job is to like help you create a character. And so whatever that character is, we're going to do it together. You're going to feel good. I'm going to feel good. It's going to be great.
Right. Well, you say it like it's so easy, but there's so much intentionality. And that's what I've loved in talking with all of you so much, is like, you just have so much intention and humility and, really using your intuition and your empathy as well. You make it look easy, but it is actually quite skilled what you're doing here. And so to take all of that and to think about it kind of in a larger context, there's this phrase sort of changing the tire while you're driving down the highway, right? And you're really literally engaged in this process of making change. I keep coming back to that. Like, you're really sort of tailoring, you're making change, right? One set, one production at a time. So do you have any sort of bigger picture thoughts or ideas about what folks in your role can do as you have a hand in making change?
Yes, I do.
Go for it.
I think it's really super important that as heads of department that we hire transgender crew, and I think that's like a really important initiative that we all need to take on. And some colleagues of mine and I started an organization called the Film Path, and actually we have several founding members on: Nancy Steiner, Cami Lennox, Bex Crofton Atkins are all with us today. And so our initiative is to usher in and provide mentorship to BIPOC and transgender below the line crew members, because we look around on set and we don't see the diversity that we want to see. And so I feel like this is a really important thing that we all have the power to do as heads of department, and to ensure that we have diverse crew. And if we aren't finding the union members that we want to hire to create diversity, that we need to create mentorships and help people get into the unions. Because if you don't know anyone in the industry already, or you don't know anything about the union or how to get in, it's like almost impossible. It's like, to figure out. I mean, I'm still learning about what all the union rules and everything are. And, I've been a union member for 20 years. So I think that's a really important initiative that we all can take on as heads.
I'm going to go ahead and put the Film Path's URL in the chat so you can all find out more about them.
Yeah, we're here for the community. We have meetings on Sunday, every Sunday. If any of you ever want to attend and see what's going on, see what we're up to. It's a relatively new organization we founded this last summer. We're still organizing and getting things off the ground. The website is a work in progress right now, but all the information is there, and we'd be excited to have any of you come to a meeting and get involved.
Great. I was just going to say that just diversity as a whole is important. And I'm always trying to have a diverse crew. I do have one trans member that of my crew that I try to take on whatever job that I'm on, because I like to support. And she was a PA and now she's in the union. And so, if anyone would like to have her number, I'll happily pass that along. And she's great, and she has the best energy, and she's just there to do an amazing job. And so it's however you can support diversity in general is amazing, but especially our trans brothers and sisters, because you really do want to help help people in general, but you also want to if you're going to come up, bring other people up with you.
Trans people face so many obstacles when it comes to securing employment and finding safe spaces to be working. And so the ability to usher in career opportunities and career development opportunities with long-term, career growth potential just by bringing trans people onto your crews is really huge.
Yeah. And, Transparent is a great place where that, the transformative action, and which was really hiring people in roles and making sure that trans people were represented globally throughout the whole set. And then when you think about Disclosure, Trans Lives on Screen, which is on Netflix that you have to watch, they brought on, they filled the roles that they could with folks who could do those jobs. And for any role where they couldn't find a trans or non-binary person to do that role, they had a shadowing program so that it was folks learning from cis people, right, who could give them the benefit of their expertise and help lift the community up. And yeah, it's true, Shakina. I mean, the numbers are just dire, right? So this is a real moment to say we have to really concretely address some serious injustice that has come upon these folks simply because of who we are. It's not anything we've done. It's not anything about us. It's simply because of this identity that has been so marginalized. And that it's actually pretty easy to see someone and offer them an opportunity, right? And you just don't know how life-changing that can be.
I never even addressed it. I never even thought to talk about the fact that that she's trans. It's just she was just a really great employee. You know what I mean? She's just a great person to have on the crew. So I think that if we could just get people to think that way, it's not about the fact that they're trans or not. It's just they're a really good person at that. They do a great job, and that's what you want to have around. It doesn't matter if they're trans or not trans,
Right.
It does matter, to the trans person in a way. And and I was on a show where I was doing a guest star spot, and I was repeatedly misgendered throughout everything on set. It was just really, it got that melty comic that Scott showed. And it got to a point we were on a break and the PA was walking me back, and the PA was at least gender non-conforming, if not trans identified, but they were the only other person, like me on set. And there's sort of that way that we have a a radar to know like who's safe to talk to. So I ended up like, I didn't feel like I could talk to the director or the AD, but I ended up talking to the PA about like how uncomfortable I was. And that PA, who was also trans, like helped me get my concerns to the people who could actually change the environment on set, because in other ways I was so disempowered. So it's interesting because like when you're coming from a marginalized community, like, and you see others like you in the larger on set or in the larger world, those people become allies, regardless of the sort of power structure of the professional hierarchy. So having more of us around makes it safer for all of us.
100%. Anyone else have anything to say on this particular topic before we go into our Q&A?
I would actually offer something kind of bouncing off of what Shakina brought up, which is I had what do you do when there's a mistake that's made or something doesn't go right? And this is something that happened on my film Adam. So, I mean, I talked a lot, before about all the work that I've done on Transparent and other productions to create a very trans inclusive, very trans aware climate on set. And we did all that on this feature I was directing as well. And we had a great wardrobe department, great head. Everybody had, done the work and everybody was on the same page. And there was one day where we had a bigger group with extras and some non-professional extras that were kind of pulled from the community and so on. And I believe what happened was we had a day player in the wardrobe department who wasn't as, didn't go through quite as much of the 101 training stuff. And again, this is more of an indie thing, kind of obviously fast moving. And I think what happened, I found this out later, was that I think an extra was misgendered unintentionally by this day player, and the day player just didn't know how to move on. It was sort of I think they froze, and it just basically the extra didn't talk to anybody about this, unfortunately, and then it came out on social media much later. So this was really disappointing for me personally as a trans director and a producer and somebody who's done a lot of work in this direction. It was really disappointing to hear that this is how it went. And it just sort of was a situation where something fell through the cracks. And what I think I'm still kind of trying to figure out what could have been done differently, just even hypothetically. But one thing there's lots of little things I guess I could point to, but I think one thing that maybe would have helped actually would have been somebody to have made an announcement that they are here to be an ally. If anything, if come to me, if anybody, if anything happens, please, I'm here for you. Whether that's someone in the AD departments, like this cool PA or the AD themselves, or, maybe it's someone in the wardrobe department actually who could be an ally, which is something we didn't really know to take that extra step because we kind of just thought, oh, we've got this, we've got the wheels are on the truck and, we're not changing a tire because we're going and it's good. But, it's normal for a mistake to happen. And I think that's also something that should be acknowledged, is that there's inadvertent like misgendering, like you gave the example, Scott, earlier of like, oops, a little oopsie and just moving on. Like if you had a conference of all trans people, someone's going to get someone's pronoun wrong at some point inadvertently. It's okay. It's normal. But what do you do and how do you kind of like give people the tools to pick up and move forward? And how do you make someone kind of an ally for somebody who doesn't know who to go to? So I'm still kind of trying to figure out systematically how to best put up guardrails for the future. And I would say it's a work in progress, and things are going to still, even on the best set, things are going to happen. So I almost kind of pose that as sort of a hypothetical thing for everybody to think about too, just independently, like what do you all think could help? How do we avoid that / bounce back from it? Because maybe it's unavoidable too. So I guess I would just throw that out.
I'd love to share just quick. Oh, sorry, Heidi. I'm going to say this real quick because in language that I think is super helpful. When Scott said about like the not making a big deal out of misgendering, I think a really helpful phrase to include in your quick apology is just "I see you." And so if you misgender someone and you say, sorry, I see you, Scott, he, blah. And that I see you is just like an instant affirmation. It's an ownership that you had the linguistic error. It doesn't place any of the conflict resolution onto the other person. Just, sorry, I see you. There's your right pronoun. So I just wanted to offer that as a tool, as a quick tool.
So powerful as a quick little tool for sure. Heidi, did you want to jump in?
Oh, I was just gonna say, so like yesterday I had to do it's like a sexual harassment training through A24 for a project, and it was very detailed, and the questions were very nuanced, and you have to score 100 in order to pass to get a certificate to be able to work. And I think that, transgender sensitivity training is something that is needed, and that could be implemented in the same way where, studios could have training. You do it online, you have to pass in order to work. And so I think that's something that could be talked about and promoted in terms of, just hiring practices and educating people, because the reason why I thought of it is because throughout the questions that were extremely nuanced, you had to really think. Every right answer led to speaking to someone on your team or your crew, or speaking to a supervisor before you either ignore it or assume anything or go off on social media or whatever it is, that to speak to someone, always to speak to someone about it. So to have a witness. Yeah.
Absolutely. And actually, gender identity work is starting to be encapsulated in sexual harassment training, because so much, like if you're talking about a person's body and where they are in their transition, that's actually sexual harassment because you're talking about their body, right? And I'm saying this outside of the ways that you have to talk about bodies in costume design, right? But just sort of in general, I think we're going to start seeing that. That seems to be the trend that we're moving toward. Well, if no one else has anything to say, we can move into our Q&A. If our friends who are online here, friends, another great gender neutral word, right? You can, if you want to turn on your video, you're welcome to, or if you want to drop your questions in the chat for these amazing people, thank you. This is the time, I always say, when we're having these workshops, this is the time to never be worried about if you're going to ask something incorrectly or be worried about it. This is the time where you can do that, and we can, and we can unpack it, and, no judgment, no worries. Please do feel free to jump in.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Tony Nigez. I'm a costume designer with the Guild. I've worked on RuPaul's Drag Race for the last 3 or 4 seasons. I did a celebrity drag race, but that's working more with, with drag queens. We did celebrity drag race where we did a lot of cisgender men in drag, which is different than working with trans. And I've worked with trans women all my life, because before I started doing costuming, I actually did a lot of pageants, Miss Continental, all these types of pageants where I would do dresses for trans women. And one of the things that really irks me is when I see a trans character and the alterations, the fitting is just, it's some simple things like that I feel sometimes as a costumer, we sometimes have to look at, when we shop, because not all, and I'm saying just women in general, not just trans women, not everybody can wear off the rack. And there's sometimes where it's little small alterations do make a huge difference for the actor. I did a prep commercial where all the actors were trans, and they were telling me that sometimes they don't speak up because they don't want to become that person who's bothering the director or whoever when stuff does not fit right, whether it be, the length of the arm or whatever. So just keeping that in mind, I just wanted to share that. And I'm also open to anybody that's looking to work with anyone that has a lot of experience working with trans folks. I have. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tony. That's great. Glad you're here. Thanks for being here.
Hi, it's Christopher Lawrence. Tony's a new member. So welcome to the Guild, Tony. I'm on the board of the Guild. I have 2 questions. The first one is just, I'm going to be moderating a panel for the LGBTQIA. It's called Cultural Conversations. And when we were doing some research on that, I had realized that a great place for pronouns would be on the deal memos that costume designers get. And I was wondering, Scott or Rhys, or even Shakina, if there has been any development in that in the world of like SAG and casting.
No, I mean,
we're the first phone call, and not the name necessarily on the call sheet doesn't always tell you,
Right. I mean, this is what we're building forward with, right?
Yeah. So we'll join you with that effort. And my other question was, I was the assistant costume designer on Tu Wong Fu. Thanks for everything, Julie Newmar. And there's a big thank you, Shakina. Same back to you. Your work on Transparent was awesome. But there's this thing, drag queens and trans, which we know are very different. But I do think a lot of the world thinks they're the same. And I was wondering if someone would speak to, I don't know what that conversation is, or, what's the best way to sort of educate people like they're different in a loving, supportive way.
I mean, I think it's like a Venn diagram, because there are trans people who are also drag queens. So, I mean, I'm sure, Scott, you have some like formal language where you can really quickly break down like the differences and such. But yeah, there are trans people who are, as Scott said, everything that has to do with the Trans 101. And there are drag queens who are people who live their lives in their assigned gender, traditionally cisgender, and who are just performing the opposite gender, on stage.
And drag is about performance, right? And so if you can think of a more welcoming workplace environment than a drag show for somebody who's transgender, there are a lot of trans people who performed, right, in that way. So there are plenty of trans people who are drag queens. And at the same time, right? Yeah, that when, I mean, RuPaul is a perfect example, right? RuPaul is a cisgender gay man, right? Who is amazing and flawless and who performs in this drag persona, right? Which is different than, say, Peppermint, right? Who is a transgender woman who also performs in this amazing, flawless drag, right? So it's, I always say it's the price of a ticket and a lot of glitter, right? but that you could be trans or cisgender or whatever, right? And do drag.
Yeah, well, I just was afraid that it could be insulting or, just when the two groups are lumped together.
Absolutely. And we do have to break it apart. And I probably should have done that in our 101 for this particular group, right? Because yes, it is, so much of representation has put drag has conflated drag and transgender. And so people want to respond either by, applauding and laughing, right? And sort of, we're at a drag bar, which is when like a professional trans woman accountant walks into the room, right? And so that's been kind of the impact of focusing on this performance, which we understand television and film would focus on performance, right? But we have to separate that from people's real lives.
We actually talked about that, Scott, when we talked about performative allyship. And there are occasions, which I'm sure many of you have seen this or experienced this, where folks feel like, oh, like that person's trans, I want to show them that I'm down and accepting. So I want to be like, yes, girl, queen, yes. And that's drag lingo. That comes from a very specific place. But like when you come at me with that language, then I feel like you're seeing me as someone that I'm not and sort of like trying to put me in a box. So I would just caution folks to, avoid turning on that sort of performative allyship and instead think about how you can be an actual ally.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
I feel the same way as a gay man. I hate when some actor or actress thinks they're cool by calling me girl. I don't relate to that either.
We're on set. We're not in a bar, right? Yes, go ahead, Nancy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for doing this panel. It's a great meeting. Everybody, I think it's a great idea to have pronouns on the call sheet. I know there's no room on a call sheet and the words are getting smaller and smaller every year, but I just think that would be amazing, not just for talent, but for everyone. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? Everyone.
Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is it's going to come from a lot of different directions. I think having that conversation every place where you deal with forms, right, it's all going to move toward, right? And I think most people agree it does become a question of how are people going to even like sign their names at this point? But at the same time, it's like, well, this is actually quite important. So let's go ahead and figure out the design. A lot of times it helps to explain why, right? And to say, think about every person, whether you're crew or whether you're an actor, if you have to explain that you use they pronouns to every single person that you're talking to on set, that's quite a chunk of your day and of your energy, right? And if everybody then has to, flitter about and say, oh, by the way, use they pronouns, right? Like it's taking away from your productivity. It's a pretty simple cost benefit.
Name tag.
Or the name tags, right?
Name tag and pronoun. I mean,
and that's something that as a costume designer, I imagine that you can have in your toolkit.
We could have it for our crew, definitely. And then ask would you like a name tag? To the rest of the crew.
And a reality is too that some people don't. There is sort of a faction of folks who do not like to share their pronouns. They feel that it is coercive, and it's not necessarily from an anti-trans standpoint. A lot of times I find that it's women from a different generation than myself who feel like they've experienced sexism so deeply that they don't want to give people a reason. Right.
That's interesting. I didn't think about it that way.
Right. So it's a very nuanced conversation, but it doesn't, we always have to hold to that. There may be reasons that people want to do it that aren't that they're anti-trans, Oh,
Annalisa, that's cool.
Yeah.
In the chat, Ryan Murphy shows have people labeling their walkies with their pronouns. I guess so. Yeah. Some people don't want to say their pronouns. So I don't want to make them uncomfortable either.
Right. And you hope, you hope that you don't get theirs wrong. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts? Any last thoughts from the panel? Any last questions from folks on here? Just checking the chat to make sure there aren't any questions that I'm missing.
I just wanted to say that having done a show starting in 2013 through the years that you mentioned the fluidity, things are constantly evolving. And Rhys and Zachary would have to put a new 101 trans primer together every season we did Transparent because terms were different, labels were different. And so there is always, there's no set answer necessarily. And there's always the chance that you're going to get it wrong. But, and Scott, you and I talked about this, but as costume designers, we do this with all of our talent, but to just listen and be humble is a really important thing about the process. And that's all I wanted to say.
Powerful last words. Sarah, did I see that you had your hands up?
I did, but it was just to say thank you so much for having this. I'm a member of 829 on the East Coast, and I've done a lot of theater, and I know, well, I don't know, but I have followed Shakina from Sparrington Stage Company way back in 2012. And so I just feel like even as a theater and opera costume designer, this is such an important conversation to have. And I'm so thankful that you guys are hosting this panel. And I hope it's the beginning of many more. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I just want to say thanks to Ivy. We started having this conversation over a year ago, and you've really stuck with it and made this happen. So thank you for organizing it. Thank you for getting everyone. Thank you to our panel for taking the time on a Saturday. Really appreciate you, and for sharing your expertise. What's wonderful is we've recorded this, and so I think this is going to be a resource that's going to be available moving forward. So we'll use it for as long as it's useful, and then we'll have another conversation when things evolve.
Well, Scott, I hope that we can have you back for more conversations, and I would love to have more classes on how we can be better, just as a community for Costumes and 705 and 829, and a lot more locals, I hope, will join us for some of these talks, even if it's just to have a quick word. But I know Annalisa had a quick question in the chat. 1 second. Oh, any advice for when things come up in scripts with little to no information are asked to research on boards for designers? For instance, queer gendered teenagers, but no other information is given, but you need a photo to show a director.
My experience with this, I work with Greg Araki a lot, who, if you know Greg Araki, you know that he is one of our very first gay directors who always writes across the board every sort of like gender, everything, for everything. So he'll write something like that, but not really give you any sort of like insight of what he's thinking. And so for me, like, either I would go and have a conversation with him because he may have something, or someone he's basing it off of and not really like, he just didn't put that in the script. And so you can gain information that way. A lot of the times just because I do have friends in all genres, like sometimes I use actual reference photos of people I know. And I just feel like it's a very open conversation that you go and you have with the director. And you can have like some mood boards and you can have like some image references. Sometimes it's about like sometimes it's about a piece of clothing. Like maybe it's like, oh, well, how do you feel about this sort of like idea clothing wise? And so it just kind of helps spark the conversation of what the director kind of like is thinking, whether he or she even knows yet. So it's part of our job to like give them like visual cues, I think, and then they can like just sort of impart what's in their brain to you. At least that's how it is with Greg. You show him one thing and he's like, okay, and blah, 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 blah. So, you know, I mean, yeah, that's my experience.
I know too that GLAAD and Getty Images, that there are several, and also the stock image company, I'm blanking on the name, but there are initiatives now where just Google imaging things is actually coming up with, you know, there's been a concerted effort to make sure that you actually see images that actually really resonate with those terms. So that's becoming easier as well. All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca. In the chat, this conversation has given me hope for the future in our industry. Thank you for this dialogue. Well, thank you all for the work that you're doing. Thank you. I mean, it takes all of us, and I think I feel so much more hope also, and just so much more confident, right? For the humility and the empathy and the really amazing work that you're all doing. So I just want to say thank you to our panel once again. Thank you to Ivy. And here's to this being a resource for whoever's listening in the future. I hope it worked for you.